It's news to nobody that Black Panther movies are a favorite subject of the culture war, so naturally, that means there are bad takes abound. In general, I try to read and click on none of them just to maintain my sanity, but in one particular scenario, the YouTube algorithm broke me. It convinced me somehow, or I guess I did it of my own accord, to click on one particular video that was a Black Panther 2 take that was so bad that it wasn't just disappointing, it wasn't just depressing, it was actually quite profound. So much so that I decided that it's even worth breaking down in this video. So this particular take on Black Panther 2 comes from Tim Pool. Now, I'm actually not even that familiar with Tim Pool's work, so I don't want this video to be taken as a denigration of his content as a whole, because to be honest, I just haven't seen very much of it. In general, I'm very critical of how people will celebrate, share, and accept an argument based on whether or not it aligns with their tribal politics and less on whether or not they actually agree with the argument. So I don't want this video to be that for Tim Pool. Also, I'm not actually going to play clips from the video because I don't want to deal with any claiming nonsense, but you can find the video by searching pretty easily. In the video, he claims that Black Panther 2 Wakanda Forever is not just racist, but insanely racist by being too woke. And in order for me to not only explain his argument, but to explain why the argument is ridiculous, I'm going to have to give some minor spoilers into the story of Black Panther 2. But really, if you haven't seen the movie, I don't think what I'm about to say is going to change the impact of your viewing of the movie in any way, so stay tuned. So to very briefly and very simply summarize the plot of Wakanda Forever, basically the Wakandans find themselves in a conflict with these underwater superhumans whose ancestors were displaced by the Spanish conquest of Central America. They're led by this guy named Namor, and he, as well as the other beings, derive their power from water. And here's where the big spoiler comes in, so if you want to avoid spoilers, plug your ears now. At the end, Namor is defeated by an explosion that hits him from behind. So Poole basically makes the assertion that this movie is horribly racist because Namor, who is a Central American, crosses through borders underwater by getting wet, and that he needs to ultimately be defeated by being dried off, because again, his power comes from the water, and then at the end, the fiery explosion that hits him from the back is meant to suggest that his back needs to be, quote, dried off in order to be defeated. And to him, this is a very clear indication that the movie is promoting a racial slur that you can probably think of that I'm not going to say against Central Americans. Now, the argument that I just recounted may be so silly that you may just want to roll your eyes and walk away and be done with it, but there are some issues that I have with this that I think make it so that it warrants a pretty careful analysis. So I'm going to break down the 3 big reasons that this really bothers me. Now, my first and probably most ridiculous problem that I have with Poole's analysis is that it's guilty of the same wokeness that he's constantly railing against. Now, if you've listened to my Twitch stream, you've probably heard me say this 1,000 times, but communication is a 2-step process. There is the expression, and then there's interpretation. So something is said, whether it's a comment or a joke, or maybe it's a work of art like a statue or a film, and that is expressed. And then there's the subject that interprets it. Or another way to put this is that it's sign production, so the sign that is produced by the comment or the expression or the work of art, and then there is the sign consumption, which is the subject, be it me or you or Tim Pool, that consumes the expression and interprets it. And I will shout this from the mountaintops, but we not only need to be responsible in our expression or in our sign production, but also responsible in our interpretation or our sign consumption. And one of the key problems with wokeness that I would imagine Tim Pool agrees with is that it puts all of the responsibility on the expressor, the expressions, or the sign production. So basically, no comment, no joke, no statue, no work of art can be made or uttered if there's even the most remote possibility that it could be interpreted in a way that would offend someone or that would produce some kind of bad result. One of the key thinkers of wokeness, if we can call him that, is this guy named Ibram X. Kendi, and he often says that impact outweighs intent, but I very very strongly disagree with this, because I think that we need to take intent into account when we interpret and not place all of the responsibility on the sign production. So, for example, if USC students see a John Wayne exhibit on their campus, they might see that as just a symbol of racism because John Wayne was, alive in the 40s and 30s and definitely had less progressive sentiments than we had, and they wouldn't interpret it as a symbol of exceptional acting, exceptional feats in cinema. I mean, this guy is the star of some of the greatest movies ever made, or that he is one of the key artifacts that has spread the myth of the American West to other countries. But they won't see it as that. They will only take it in the most uncharitable way possible. And that's where wokeness has kind of become a strange pathology, where people see it as their moral duty to interpret something in the most uncharitable way possible as to met out any impurities. And what's baffling to me is that this is exactly the kind of behavior that Tim Pool is promoting by suggesting that a Central American superhero who travels through water, who gets his power through water, and who is defeated from an explosion from behind is super racist. I mean, that is the epitome of an irresponsible interpretation or irresponsible sign consumption. In my opinion, a much more mindful and responsible interpretation would be that Namor is Central American because the filmmakers wanted to continue with the theme of studying and portraying cultures who had been adversely affected by colonialism, and that he is underwater and his whole species of people are underwater because they wanted to mirror the conditions of Wakanda as being a hidden nation that the rest of the world doesn't know about. And then regarding the elements that ultimately lead to his defeat at the end, it makes much more sense to assume that he derives his power from water and that the protagonists ultimately have to evaporate the water in his body, because two of the three main protagonists in the movie are scientists, and the ability to create a technology that evaporates water from inside him gives the film an opportunity to match brawn, because Namor is very physically powerful, with brains, because the protagonists of the movie are both these brilliant scientists. And then lastly, the idea that he gets hit by an explosion of fire from behind and it hits him in the back, I think it's much more reasonable to just assume that mighty supervillains need to be taken by surprise. And that's it. Now, the second thing that really bothers me about this revolves around this concept called value smuggling. Now, this is something that you see very often in online discourse and also in the academy. And it's basically the idea that we will take our moral sentiments or our political beliefs and we will kind of disguise them into an argument that is meant to be value neutral or even scientific in some sense. We are, in a sense, hiding our political beliefs under the guise of value neutrality. So in this case, Poole is summarizing the events of the movie in a very deliberate key of scorn for Disney, but he's doing so in a way that disguises that scorn as just a value neutral objective recounting of the events of the film. Now, if I were to list the relevant story elements to Poole's analysis, I might say that Namor and his people travel to Wakanda through water. Namor and his people derive their power through water. Namor's body water has to be evaporated in order for him to lose his power, and Namor is ultimately defeated when an explosion hits him from the back. Now, if I'm trying to rile up as much anger as possible at Disney and cast them as guilty of something despicable, I might recast these plot elements like this. Namor illegally crosses the border into an advanced country. Namor gets his powers from being wet. Namor has to be dried off to be defeated, and Namor is ultimately defeated when his back becomes dry. And this is exactly the language that Tim Poole uses to make his argument. And I guess I get it, but in a very cynical way, because I know that blurring the line between fact and political sentiment can be a very powerful hit, especially for people who are so obsessed with the culture war and who get no greater gratification than to see the other side humiliated, but it's dishonest, counterproductive, and honestly just very ugly. Now, the last thing that really bothers me about Poole's analysis is really just a personal pet peeve when it comes to interpreting movies. There's this sense, it's almost kind of like an intellectual bullying that people will do, in that they suggest that if meaning can be construed by mashing together different variables, then that is the most elevated, sophisticated, and maybe even definitive reading of the film. At one point in the video, he even accuses Central Americans of just not getting that Disney was directing a slur at them. But this is ridiculous because the validity of an analysis, to me, is based on evidence. How much evidence can you build to make your point or your argument sound compelling? Not whether or not something that can possibly be taken as political. The fact that it can or cannot be political, that's not what makes it a valid interpretation. That's not what makes it an elevated interpretation. That's definitely not what makes it a definitive interpretation. And I feel like there's this intellectual bullying that goes on in that, well, if you don't see the political message, well, then you're not sophisticated enough. And in order for people to prove their intelligence, they will often agree that they see the political message, even when there's not enough evidence to suggest that there is such a message. And this bothers me because it makes cinema a very joyless process. It makes consuming cinema and being critical about cinema, which is obviously something I care a lot about, into this process of just hunting for the most grotesque ideology possible. And that's joyless. It's probably very harmful to the medium that I care so deeply about. And it's something that I am very critical of and do not approve of. Anyway, if you want to talk more about Wakanda Forever, check me out on Twitch. I took a little bit of a break, but I'm going to start again with God of War Ragnarok on Monday morning. So check me out on Twitch. Link is in the description. I can't wait to play God of War 2. I was such a big fan of the first one, and the reviews have been crazy good. So hit me up on Twitch, and be sure to subscribe for more content here. And as always, thanks for watching, guys. Peace.